I'm Joanne Ellison. I'm a PhD student at the University of Southampton in the UK. Today I'm going to be talking about some work I've been doing using state-of-the-art statistical methods to develop a model capable of accurately forecasting cohort fertility for countries around the world. And this is joint work with John Forster and Erengul. So the plan for the talk is first I will introduce the forecasting goal that we want to achieve, and then I will discuss one of the current most successful models in the field and why there is room for improvement. Then I will talk you through how we developed our own model to try to overcome these limitations, and then I'll show you some of the results comparing the two models. So firstly, the goal. Here we have what's called a Lexis surface, and this one's for the Czech Republic. So it's essentially a heat map of fertility rates with age on the vertical axis and cohort year of birth on the horizontal axis. And the darker the colour is, the higher the rate. And the rates themselves are the expected number of children, or the rate itself is the expected number of children born to a woman of that age in that cohort. And these are rate estimates, which we calculate by dividing the observed number of children by the total number of women exposed. And then each column is therefore the set of fertility rates for a particular cohort as we follow them through their reproductive lives, and we take this to be ages 15 to 44. And we will call each column a cohort schedule. So you can see that up until 1965, the cohort schedules are complete, because the reproductive lives of these cohorts are in the past, but after 1965 they're incomplete because the cohorts are only part of the way through their reproductive lives, and in the case of the 1995 cohort they haven't started them yet. And what our goal is to fill in the missing part of the Lexis surface over here and forecast the incomplete cohort schedules. So now I'll talk about one of the current best models in the field. So this is the model of Schmertmann et al. 2014, and I'll call this model model SZGM after the authors. So it was ranked second in a recent paper comparing existing fertility forecasting approaches, so it's clearly very successful. And it's a Bayesian model, which means that you can explicitly incorporate prior knowledge, for example, assumptions about how rates might change across age and across cohort. And you can also quantify the uncertainty associated with the forecasts. The model uses a dataset of 37 countries, most of which are from the HFD. So for each country, the dataset is split into two parts, a historical part and a contemporary part. And here I show this for the Czech Republic, with the historical part on the left and the contemporary part on the right. So the historical data is used to provide prior information about how the rates change across cohorts and across ages, so horizontally and vertically. And then this information is combined with the contemporary data in order to obtain forecasts and to fill in that missing part of the surface. And again, as it's a Bayesian approach, we don't just get forecasts, but we get uncertainty associated with them too. So although the model is very successful and effective, there are some limitations. So firstly, the actual model is quite simple, but the complexity is hidden within the model components, and this lack of transparency can make it hard to understand. And some of the forecasts also don't have realistic levels of uncertainty. So this motivates our aim, which is to propose a model which overcomes these limitations, and we take a hierarchical Bayesian approach. So now I'll talk through my model. I'll give a brief of our model that we developed. So the idea behind it is that we want to take the complexity that is in the model components in model SZGM and bring that out into the model structure, and so we are explicitly incorporating it into the model structure. We take a hierarchical Bayesian approach, which allows us to create complex models with simple structure, and this is following recent advances in the literature, such as the UN population projections, which also use a hierarchical Bayesian approach. We model rates on the logarithmic scale, as is the standard approach, as opposed to the raw scale in the Schmertmann model. And we use time series models to model the evolution of rates over time instead of a projection model. We use a Poisson model for the count data, so that's the number of births for a given exposure. And we still divide the data into contemporary and historical parts, but we allow the contemporary data to have more weight and greater influence on the results, because we think that this will lead to more realistic forecasts as opposed to just using the historical information the historical data to give all the prior information. And we'll call this model model H as Sedgian to indicate the hierarchical nature. So I won't give you the mathematical specification of the model, but I'll just talk through its hierarchical structure. So for a contemporary Lexis surface, you can think of there as being three types of rates. So the rates for the complete cohort schedules, the past rates for the incomplete cohort schedules, and the future rates for the incomplete cohort schedules. So for the first two of these, we have observed data, but then for the third one, because that's in the future, the data is unobserved. And then we have the red downward arrows, which are indicating the data observation model, which is the Poisson model I mentioned previously. Then we have the time series model, which is indicated by the blue arrows, and this is constructed using various model parameters which describe how the three types of rates depend on each other, and this is based on prior information and other demographic assumptions. So then we use the observed data to allow us to learn about the model parameters and therefore fit the model. And then the important part is this blue arrow there connecting the past rates for the incomplete cohort schedules with the future rates, because this determines under what assumptions our forecasts will be generated. So then once we have forecasts for the future rates, we then generate forecasts for the unobserved data, because this is actually what we're interested in, because in reality we're going to have counts and exposures, so we'll have rate estimates, we won't have the true rates. So now this is a visual representation of the dependent structures that make up the time series part of the model. So I split the contemporary Lexis surface into 4 regions, regions A to D, and then within each region there is a different dependent structure, and so a different time series model. So in region B, at the bottom, the dependence is just on the previous age-specific rate, and then as we move to region C, dependence is also on the previous cohort-specific rate, and then in region D, dependence is also on the slope from the previous 5 age-specific rates. So as we move from region A to region D, we're building up the complexity, but in a structured and coherent way. So now I'll just briefly talk about how we fit the model. So as we're taking a Bayesian approach, this means that for each unobserved rate, we get a posterior probability distribution, as opposed to a point estimate. And then we can't write down this posterior because our model is quite complex, so we approximate it. And we use Monte Carlo methods to do this, which sample from the posterior. In particular, we use Hamiltonian Monte Carlo, which is a more efficient way to do the sampling compared to other MCMC methods. We fit the model in R using the software RStan, and then once we've got the samples for the unobserved rate estimates, we compute 90% and 50% credible intervals, or probability intervals. So the interpretation is that there's a 90% or 50% chance that the interval will contain the true rate estimate, and then this allows us to quantify our uncertainty. So now I'll talk about our results. So we compare our model with model SZGM by fitting both of them to the countries in the HFD 2017 dataset and the non-HFD countries that are used in Schmettmann et al. And we generate 2 sets of forecasts, one for 2000 and one for 2010. And this is for 33 and 41 countries respectively. So the 2000 forecasts give us extra data which we call holdout data, which we can use to test and compare the success of the credible intervals. And then the 2010 forecasts just use all the available data that we have for forecasting. So now I'll talk through the 2000 forecasts. So to compare the credible intervals, we use something called scoring rules. So what these do is they calculate a score for each forecast based on how precise and accurate it is. So the better the forecast is, the lower the score will be. And we use a score called the Continuously Ranked Probability Score, or CRPS. And we calculated the average score for each cohort, for each country, for the CFR, which is the cohort total fertility rate, so just the sum of the age-specific fertility rates for each cohort. And then we plot the results here with the black points being the scores for model SZGM, and then the red points are where we have done worse, and the green points are where we have done better. So you can see that it's quite even, and we do better in about half of the countries. But for some of the post-communist countries, such as Hungary and the Czech Republic, we don't do so well. And generally, we find that because our model puts more weight on the contemporary data and the trends of the recent rates, we find that it is better suited to when the contemporary Lexis surfaces are more stationary and stable. So now I can show some of the plots for individual countries for the CFR. So on the left we have the Netherlands, which is a country where we did quite well. So you can see that, so our credible intervals are the ones in red, and then the Schmertmann ones are the ones in blue, and then the black points are the observed CFR values, and then the forecast period is after the dashed line. So you can see, for example, the Netherlands, the points are following our credible interval, whereas Schmertmann's kind of diverges away from them. And then Portugal, we also do quite well. The next two, Schmertmann does a lot better. And then for Belarus, on the right, we do very kind of roughly the same, and then the intervals diverge at the end. So I'll just skip through the 2010 forecasts. And then to summarise, we proposed a hierarchical Bayesian model for cohort fertility that incorporates the model complexity into the model structure, and it builds on the success of Schmertmann as a forecasting tool within one single transparent and intuitive model. And we seem to have some improvements in forecasting over Schmertmann, particularly for countries that haven't experienced the structural shift. In terms of next steps, we've had some very helpful comments from a reviewer, which we're trying to work on at the moment, so really focusing on how we can reduce that sensitivity for the recent data for the countries that have experienced structural change. Thank you very much for listening.